at St. John's for years and has been involved stewardship committee, fellowship committee, building committee. I've joined many activities. Thank you, Lynn, for that. And of course, you, Betty. Suzanne is a wonder person. She is working full-time outside the home, working full-time in the home, raising three children. Is the chairman of the board of her children's school and also serves on our children, youth and family services group. It's amazing. And then lastly, Jared. And Jared, of course, does really not need an introduction. I did ask them if there was one detail that might be hidden under there that I could bring forward, and I don't think it will be a detail you've missed. Just that I love sunshine. So Betty, if you could get us started, that would be good.
I don't know if I should just stand up here or over there, what works
As
best.
long as we can hear you wherever.
Okay, well, can everybody hear me? Okay, well, thank you for listening to my story. I was asked by the stewardship committee to share a little bit of my own personal journey. And I have to say that stewardship and giving has been the most challenging and by far the most rewarding piece of my faith journey. I remember hearing way back that in the Native community, your status is determined by how much you give away, not how much you acquire. And that really resonated with me. And I always wanted to be one of those people who felt that they had enough, that they could be generous and give a lot. I didn't necessarily want to see my name in the program at the Guthrie Theater, but I wanted to be the person that made it possible for wonderful things to be available to the widest variety of people. And I didn't really feel that I had the capacity, though, to be a real generous giver. And I'll tell you why. I fell in love with my college sweetheart, and he was diagnosed before graduation with aplastic anemia, which is a very serious blood disorder. Needless to say, his prognosis was not good. And when we graduated, nobody was going to hire him because he was going probably to die pretty soon. So, you know, we always felt there was no cure for aplastic anemia at that time. The only treatment available was a bone marrow transplant. And this was in the 1980s. And at that time, bone marrow transplant was still considered to be experimental and it was not covered by insurance. So he had a bit of money from settlement with the chemical company that he had been working spraying insecticides. He was covered with DDT and all kinds of stuff. So we invested that money in the purchase of a home, and we started a small business, a pizza place, which on the corner of Cleveland and Grand, which is still there actually. Anyway, you know, we were pretty careful because we knew that if he ended up having a bone marrow transplant, the house that we bought we would have to sell that house to pay for the transplant. And we were attending church at St. Stephen's, Edina, and I was in my mid-30s. And one day the rector of the church, David Joslin, asked me to come into his office and see him. And he wanted to ask me something. And I said, well, I will, whatever you need me to do, I'll do, except I don't want to ask people for money. And he said, well, I was going to actually ask you to chair the Epiphany dinner. But let's talk about why that's so scary to you. Why are you so afraid to talk to people about money? And I told him my story, and that kind of kicked off a series of conversations about my fears around money and my fears about not having enough and trying to, you know, we had kids and, you know, we were giving to the church, but we were kind of treating it like our contribution, you know, our dues at the health club. You know, we were paying, I don't know, a couple $100 a year because our kids were in the, you know, youth programs, and we kind of felt like that was we needed to support that. We knew that the staff had to be paid and that the building had, needs. And so that's what we did. Well, pretty soon I was invited to serve on the vestry at St. Stephen's. And at the time, the leadership of the church decided that the vestry would make a statement to the parish that all members of the vestry were going to give at least 3% of their income to the church. And I was terrified. I was like, are you kidding? 3%? I mean, that was more than we were giving. I thought, well, they don't know how much money we make. Nobody's gonna, but I also knew that I couldn't serve with any integrity if I didn't actually do this. So I discussed it with my family and we made a decision that we were going to do that. Now that substantially increased our pledge to the church. Even though we weren't making a ton of money, still was a substantial increase from what we had been giving. And I was terrified. And I remember saying to God, if this goes south, I'm done. I'm out of, I'm not going to be doing this proportionate giving. But something interesting happened instead. Instead, when we started giving 3% of our income to the church, nothing went south. Nothing bad happened. We were still able to buy what we needed. We were still able to take vacations. We were still able to live the lifestyle that we had been living. It's just that I no longer had to worry about how much was I going to pledge and feel like it was being painfully extracted from me. It was a sense of freedom that I had never really experienced before. And so the next year we decided to bump it up and go to 4%, 5%, etc., which is a practice that has been so freeing for me personally, and something that I am so grateful to David Joslin for really helping me open up my anxieties and my fears and confront them and trust that just try this. I don't think I've ever met anyone who's made a decision to give proportionately and changed their mind or gone back and decided to do something different. I think I'm going over my 3-minute limit, so I'll finish by just saying that just this morning, I got a text from a dear friend who is not a churchgoer, but her partner is in hospice, dying. And she texted me and said, "What's the name of that church you go to?" And I'm so grateful to be able to provide, to play a part, just be a part of providing this place. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Betty.
you very much. Any questions or additions to what Betty has shared with us? Thank you so much.
Story, then.
Roger did not die of aplastic anemia. He's now 78 years old. And the pizza place is still running.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Lynn?
Yeah, I'll stand up and try and have a booming voice here. Betty and I talked, actually, well, we talk pretty regularly, just warning. But we talked and we realized that our philosophies of pledging are rather similar, and they both come from a place of wanting freedom. I was struck when I started reading the Bible as an adult about how much time the Bible talks about money. Like so much more than sex, so much more than this, that, and the next thing. And it's because we as people need guidance on it. And that what we're told is like really, really clear. You need to take care of widows and orphans. You need to share what you have. I mean, it's unequivocal. And yet it's not easy. And I think that's why we're given that guidance in scripture and in prayer. And I think I speak for many people who are affluent or have enough money or are affluent or even beyond affluent. The affluence does not free you from concerns about money. Yeah, I think it just means that you think you need a little more than you do. So you can look at somebody and you think, my goodness, you have $1 million. And it was, well, I think I need $1 million too. And I am as guilty of that as anybody in the world. We had some financial insecurities when I was a kid, that stuff stays with you. And I'm naturally a rather, conservative about how I spend and how I spend my money. And so I tend to think, well, if I just have a little more, then I'll have enough and it'll keep me safe. And it doesn't.
I know.
So about 25 years ago, my kids were 8, 9, and 11. I was very unexpectedly diagnosed with a life-threatening disease. And it was not great. And it was terrifying. And I was already a churchgoer, I was already a pledger, I was doing that. But I can so vividly remember thinking, because I was terrified, and I think the thing I was most terrified was leaving my children at that stage in their lives. I remember thinking, wow, this is just putting me in a completely different place in terms of how I am afraid of things. And at that time, there was a very large lottery winning where the person won, $100 million. And I can still remember thinking that $100 billion would do nothing for me. Nothing. I already had good medical care. I had enough. You need enough. But the $100 million didn't touch it. It wouldn't cure me. It wouldn't parent my children. It wouldn't keep any of us safe. It wouldn't keep what was maybe going to happen from happening. And that's the problem when we have more than enough. If we try to use money to protect ourselves against life, we're putting money ahead of God, and I get it, ahead of the peace that God gives us. And so I try with pledging and with other kinds of giving to just put a stake in the ground and say, I'm going to give this much money, and I try to increase it. Actually, I have increased it every year. And I increase it every year. I don't know how much I'm going to increase it. It depends partly on whether I got a raise that year. But I found so much freedom in that, and in remembering that my safety does not come from a big bank account. I need health insurance. I need enough. I need a roof over my head, but I don't need to treat pledging as something that I do with what I think I can spare, because I'm not a good judge of that. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Anyone have anything they'd like to jump in with right now? Yeah.
It reminded me, you said, no matter how much you have, people. And John Steinbeck wrote in a book called The Winter of Our Discontent that there are only two ways that people think about money. One is no money, and the other is not enough money.
Yeah.
There's a lot of truth in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your story is beautiful,
Thank you.
and that's where your treasure is.
Yeah.
That's where your heart is.
Yeah. And it's not about, I've actually been talking to my daughter-in-law who, one of my daughters-in-law named Jessica, because I have two, but about it because she grew up in kind of challenging financial circumstances, and she tends to get worried about money. And I've tried to just talk to her about, first of all, giving her practical advice about, yeah, no, that's important. You need to do that. That's a savings you should make. Or yes, it's a good idea to buy a home and have a mortgage you can afford, that kind of stuff. But I've also tried very gently to say, you can't protect yourself. And it's a hard lesson. I'm still learning it.
Suzanne? Trade process? Sure.
I jotted down some notes just so I don't lose my train of thought. So when I was asked to talk about our family's giving, I started to think about it in the three main pillars of time, talent, and treasure. And as was stated in the introduction, it's kind of obvious we're pretty busy in our family with our 3 active kids. They're 7, 9, and 11, and so we're just Mark and I are in a very busy phase of life right now. But even so, when I think about giving my time, you think about, okay, so when you're busy, you have to prioritize. And so what is a priority? And for us, St. John's is a priority, and we want that to come across to our children as well. And so we make a point of coming every Sunday and making sure that they see us giving our time to this community. And then that translates into our talents too. And because when you're a part of the community, I think you really need to invest in it in multiple ways. And so we want to give our time too. And like was said, I just recently joined the CYF committee. You know, Mark, he's often up here instead of me. So he gives a lot of his time, or his time and talent. And then also we're trying to, Oliver will be a reader in church at 10:30 again. He's done that 10. Okay, so I work in church. Their church is at 10:30. I always forget, and our worship is at 10. Don't go at 10:30. He'll be a reader today at 10, and he's done that before. And so we're just trying to start to slowly introduce these things to the kids, your time, your talent, and then it's our treasure too. And we do regularly pledge. And I remember years ago, I was on the other side here where I was sitting out where you were, and I'm pretty sure it was Ray Frisbee. I'm really sure it was Ray.
It was Ray.
Okay, good. I was hoping somebody would remember this.
It was Ray.
And he was talking about when he and Phyllis were kind of in probably the same phase of like where Mark and I are. And when they thought of the idea of tithing of 10%, it just seemed too much to them. It was like, how are we gonna, we can't do that. And so they made a commitment to start doing, instead of to work up to 10%, that every year they would increase it by 10% until they got there. And Mark and I thought, okay, that's manageable. We can do that. And so that's been our practice since Ray shared with the group. And I mean, it's pretty amazing that this community just gives in so many cyclical ways. And so that's what we do. We really like the little cards that they have in the pew pockets because, as has been said in stewardship so many times, sometimes when you give online and you're the parent, the kids don't know that you're giving. They don't have any idea what those online transactions are. And so when we have them place that little card that says I give my offering online or whatever it says, that's a tangible way for them to understand more about that monetary gifts that we're giving. And so there's all these ways that we're trying to demonstrate this with the kids. And when you're a parent, you really have no idea what's sinking in. And but for
If anything.
I know. But I was really encouraged and I brought it with me. So earlier already this year, our middle child, Fiona, she's in 4th grade, and they were given a cultural object writing assignment. So they were supposed to write about a cultural object that means something to them, means something to their family, or it connects to their heritage. And she really wanted to write about the Book of Common Prayer.
Oh.
And so,
You're doing a great job, Suzanne. Full marks.
with her permission, I'm gonna read her here. My object is my father's Book of Common Prayer, his BCP. The BCP connects to me because we are both Episcopalian. My parents read from it every night to Sydney, my younger sister, Oliver, my older brother, and me. They, my parents, met at an Episcopal church. I am an Episcopalian. BCP reminds me that I am Episcopal. Nice.
Thank you, Suzanne. That's beautiful, truly. I don't know, we might have some questions and comments to follow on that.
It just reminded me, thinking about children and growing up in your family. I remember when my kids were little, I was trying to figure out how to get rid of some of the Halloween candy that they had collected because they had so much candy that I thought, wow, they're gonna drive me crazy. So I said, kids, some kids are in the hospital and they can't go trick or treating. Maybe we should share some candy with them. And I figured, what the heck, it's either that or just go steal it in the night when you're sleeping. Anyway, they said, that's a good idea. So they dumped out all their treasure. And I said, you just pick out what you wanna donate. And we'll bring it over to the hospital and give it to the nurses. And if the kids can't have it, then the nurses can have it. And they thought that was a great idea. They picked out, I figured they'd go through and pick out the stuff they didn't like. The bad stuff, the raisins and stuff like that. They picked out about almost half of what they had collected. And it just floored me. And I was thinking about Halloween. You show up as your most scary self. You just knock on the door and hold out your bag, and it just fills up with treats and blessings. And how wonderful. I mean, I wish we could all be that way. And you didn't have to do anything to earn this candy. You just showed up and then shared it. It was a big lesson to me.
Thank you.
I hope Fiona gets to read her a piece to her class.
Oh, she did, yeah, that is really is part of the assignment, and she's our introvert, she is, she's got stories going all the time up in her head, but to stand up in front of a class, she gets very nervous, but she did it, and, so we're very proud of her.
Great.
In defense of raisins, I am delighted that some of the children are delighted with raisins.
I have a question. Did anybody ask her what does it mean to be an Episcopalian? What does Episcopalian mean?
Yeah, that's true, I'm not sure, I'd have to ask her.
May not be.
Yeah.
How their brains are thinking.
Yeah.
That's how she culturally identifies.
Mhm.
Wonderful stories from across our group. Thank you, Suzanne, too. Eric, do you think we have enough time left?
I can hold forth for the rest of the time. That's yes. Is that what you're asking me to fill the rest of the, leave no room for questions and conversation?
We might have some more questions, so.
No, I can be brief. I think of my life as a giver, financial giver, in three ways. Predominantly, obviously, as a leader of faith, a faith leader, a priest, and a spiritual guide, a pastor, as a partner, as a husband, someone who I was gonna say as someone who works individually with my own money, but when I got married, our money became our money and our lives became our lives. And something I talk about with couples when they come for premarital counseling, we talk about money a lot. So I think about it as a partner. And then I think about it as a father. Suzanne did a great job of talking about how the stewardship of time, talent, and treasure shows up in our family lives. There was a period of time, so I'll start with the children, when our children were pledgers to St. John's. Some years they are, some years they aren't. But all the wisdom I will share today is not mine. It comes from my wife, who is, as a professional, works in the church and in faith communities and in spiritual communities, talking all the time about stewardship and giving and philanthropy. That's her life's work, and always through the frame of her faith and spirituality. So her wisdom was that we could talk to the kids about giving in three ways. Whenever they get an allowance from us for the chores that they do, that's their income, they have to think of it in terms of three categories. They need to give a portion of it back to the sibling, they're sharing. So they need to learn that money is not theirs to be held. We are doing our best to disabuse them of the society they live in that says you can be self-made, that your money is yours. We teach them immediately that your money is a part of a community, and that it flows back and forth. And so the first community they're born into is their family. So they share it with each other. Then there's money, obviously, for school. They're going to practice saving. We want them to know what saving looks like, not because it's theirs, but because there are things coming that they'll need to pay for. And then they give away a portion of it to a cause. We said it's called giving back to God. If everything comes from God, if you don't make your wealth, which I know will sit uneasy with some of you, you don't make your wealth. Wealth is created together in community. And if we're Christians, we believe it actually flows from the abundance that comes from God's self. So you don't make it. you are a steward of it for a moment. You hold on to it for a moment, and you have to think about where it goes. So we say you give back to God. Sometimes they give to other organizations. Sometimes they give back to a charity that strikes their heart. We're involved with Give Us Wings as we sponsor a family, so that's part of their giving. Sometimes it's to St. John's, and we ask them to think of it in percentages, because putting numbers on things, like Lynn said, is it helps concretize it and think structurally about it. So that's our children. Being a parent, we have little envelopes, or did for a long time, that were magneted to the side of the fridge, so they knew when they got their allowance, they had to divvy it up into those different envelopes. And then whatever was left over, they could use for whatever they wanted to. Because it's fun to have money and to use it. And we do talk a lot about the fact that money is something to be enjoyed. It helps you do the things you want to do. It helps you feel secure if that's your first level of need. And we try to model that with our kids. As a partner, Erin and I talk a lot about money. Obviously, it's her livelihood is talking about money. My livelihood, at least part of it, is talking about money, because as we heard again, the Bible talks about money more than any other topic, probably. It is riddled with power, money, and possessions. So we talk a lot about that in the church, but we also talk about it because it's part of our shared conversation with one another as a couple. When we were getting married, we were meeting regularly with our pastor. We were Baptists at the time, or worshiping with Baptists, I guess. I never identified fully as Baptist, but we were there. And the part of that preparation was that we were asked to build a budget together as a couple. So we had a spreadsheet. Erin loves spreadsheets. If you know me, you know I don't love spreadsheets. But we developed a spreadsheet that was our common budget. And to this day, we have it. Again, I'm terrible at the budget in terms of like checking in regularly and putting down what I've spent. We've developed workarounds. I text Erin regularly when I make an expense. Nowadays, digital tracking, everything shows up anyway, so it's a lot easier. God bless her and her patience. But it is our conversation with one another about where we value things and what we're prioritizing. And we actually do go through every single cent. Our budget is both forward-looking, 10 years. It's also monthly, month by month. It covers regular expenses and irregular expenses. And it's a document that shares clearly with one another what we're thinking about, what we're doing, and how we spend money, because it's a currency. It's how we have exchange with one another and with the world. So then the third is I'm a pastor. And again, this probably does tie still with my relationship to Erin, because all of her wisdom is where I gain all of these thoughts from. We like to think about what money means. You probably have heard it show up in the stewardship reflections and in the work that the stewardship committee has been doing. We talk a lot about our money narratives, the stories about money that shaped us. You heard it today as people shared: scarcity in early days, debts that were hard to retire, abundance or wealth, and how we frame it. Those money narratives shape how we live with our money and our relationship to it. And I'm always listening as a pastor for the money narratives that show up, less so in pastoral care, though that's important. I love that your rector asked, let's pause and let's go into that money narrative. What a healthy pastoral thing to do. To just push against that vulnerable spot in the safety of a pastoral conversation. But most especially in our budget conversations, our finance committee meetings, in leadership conversations. I'm deeply aware when someone says something like, I heard in a meeting not too long ago, this will absolve our sins of, and it was in reference to some debts that we had. I was like, wow, we're using deep theological language and not well in this moment. This is reflecting our money narrative as a community. As a pastor, I am not a capitalist, and I'm not any other ist, but I am deeply attuned to the economy described in the Gospels, especially. And
turn my picture off.
The need to lead our people to those truths about the economy in the gospel. Some of the things
You don't
that
ever want to have your video going. I thought I had it off, but no, I know you don't. You didn't.
Hey, Ed, I think you might not notice, but you're not on mute. But we're glad you're here. I think I can mute you. Hold on. Oh, there we go. Welcome. And so those are the three ways that I think about wealth. I'll stop there. I have a lot more I could say, but I get a chance to hold forth every week. So I'll pause and see if anyone has any questions for me or thoughts that have come up as we've all talked, and feel free to facilitate a wait lane.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have one thought. I appreciated, well, all of your presentations, and each one had special meaning, but when Suzanne was talking about teaching your kids that you're giving, even though you're doing it online, I don't know if I read it or I actually experienced it, but I feel that every single time when somebody comes down the alley with the plate, and I'm not putting anything in it, and I didn't know about those cards. And it's not teaching you the same thing, but one idea I had is, everybody touch the plate. Everybody touch the plate, so send it down, touch the plate. And that's participating, I think, that visible, outward and visible.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And another way that we've tried to accommodate more is, and I know I'll get like grumbles about this, but we're digital people now, for better or worse. And there is a QR code in every bulletin that you can literally, if you don't have your folding money or your jingling money with you, you can pull your phone out and you can make a small $2 gift if you'd like to in the plate as it passes, literally digitally. So your kids can see that, and they're digital natives, so they'll appreciate that that's how money does transfer. So it's another way we can do it tangibly each week.
Anybody else?
I wanted to make some comments too, that I'm not sure exactly where it came from, but I grew up with the sense of tithing, and I've never not tithed in my life, and I think talking about that kind of level. And in terms of pledging, that tithe has not always gone to a church, because as Lynn was pointing out, the admonition in the New Testament is to take care of widows and orphans and all kinds of things, and not all churches are doing much of that. So there are a lot of different Christian organizations that I've used some of that tithe for in my lifetime. So that 10%, I just never considered part of mine from the beginning, which was a gift that from God that I was not aware of for a long time. But over 40 years ago, I came to a realization that, as you were putting it, what I thought I possessed was really not mine. I really came to that understanding that I'm just a trustee, a steward for what God has provided, and He's only done that so that I can give it away. And at that same time came this sense that I needed to tithe my time as well as my money. And so at that point, I started doing that, and usually spending a month a year doing various mission work, both locally and internationally. So it's really, and that was really a point where there was a real freedom came over money in general, and just, it's not, yes, I have to be diligent, but I have to trust God to provide, period. And at the same time came this sense of beyond tithe, there's alms and gifts, and I had the freedom then to not count 10%, but be able to give as kind of as the Holy Spirit was saying, you need to do this, or you need to participate in whatever it is that's happening, either in money or time. So and I hadn't sort of heard that real sense of not owning and possessing, but being the steward of what God's given, kind of expressed, rather than I have something of mine I'm going to give, and think I don't have anything, and I need to pay attention to where it needs to go.
Thank you, Archie. Mary?
These stories are so rich, and I'm not a pastoral psychologist, but what's been roaming around in my head as I've listened to these stories is there's something here about our self-worth in the context of our relationship with God. And I have kind of a funny story about this. Some of you know that my first career was in radio broadcasting. And I had applied for a position at a commercial radio station somewhere in western Iowa. And so I was with the manager of the station, and in radio, you don't give them a paper resume. You give them at the time a cassette tape with a sample of what your voice sounds like.
A skimmer tape.
They had listened to my tape and they wanted, so he said, so what would it take for you to join the staff here? Meaning, what salary are you expecting? What would it take for you to join the staff here? I had not a clue. I was only relying on how I felt about myself at the time. And I said, and this was 1972, something like that. I said, would 7,000 be okay? That wasn't a lot of money, even in 1972. And he said, you've got the job. But that response came out of my self-worth. And if we think about this whole context being in our relationship with the divine, aren't we worth getting up to the table and doing what we're called to do? So, amen.
Yeah.
George.
I was really struck by Lynn's comment about the $100 million lottery win.
Yeah.
And in some ways, we're all on a journey to when we go from valuing the dollars in the bank to valuing other pieces of our lives.
Yeah.
And how monetarily it facilitates, you use the word protection, but in a sense, replace that with fulfillment. And the idea that connecting to the other parts, first you fill the bin to buy the bread. And then once that bin is filled, you go, what do we do with the excess?
Right.
And how does that fulfill us? And that seems to be like a theme of the stories we're hearing here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't ever want to, it would be disrespectful for people who don't have enough to say that, we can all live on a wing and a prayer, because we can. And you need health insurance, you need enough money for good food, you need housing. But for most of us in the United States, and it is our job as Christians and as Americans to provide that for people who don't have enough. But once we get back beyond that, when we get to abundance, we tend to bring into abundance this sense of scarcity. And churches do it too. I mean, we do it corporately as well. And somebody said to me one time, we get up there and we talk about God, and then we go into a business meeting and we talk as if you'd never know that God existed when we talk about money. And it's important to try to bring in some of that sense that we are sufficient into all of our conversations. Once we've taken care of the widows and orphans and paid the electric bill.
It helps to think, you use the word fulfill, and there's some, I think, some resonance there, but also the notion of conduitry, like that gifts pass through us, whether they're time, talent, treasure. We don't hold them. Anytime there's a backwater of stuff, whether it be fertilizer, food, money, you can usually trace that to a toxic spot, right? Like anywhere in the real world that stuff gets stopped, it becomes a problem. It's a glorious fact that squirrels bury every nut they find, and they forget a majority of the ones they buried, because then they can actually be spread out as new trees, right? Like that's a genius in nature. When our stuff gets buried, it doesn't grow anything. But it's in the passing through us that it becomes meaningful. And that's where I think our worth plays off the worth of the things, the time, the talent is in letting it go, which isn't to say you let it all go. But as it passes through you, as you spend it on your kids, your medicine, your well-being, that's when it has meaning. That's where the rubber hits the road.
again, and I think then we're gonna,
Yeah.
sign for.
I'm just really grateful for these stories because it makes me reflect on my own life but unfortunately, I think for many of us, we learn our most important lessons through crisis. And both Betty and Lynn. I get the two.
I understand.
Boy, it's terrific. I had a period of time when it was really difficult. And my kids I was going through divorce and my children were adolescents. And, we worked as a team, but I also realized that, we had enough. We loved each other. We were so, close, and loving, and we were all in it together. And it just didn't make any difference if they could get those genes or not, or whatever it was. And I think it's unfortunate that that's what happens. And it actually, that's what draws me to the church, keep reminding me.
Are there any comments from online? One final comment or two? No pressure. Maybe not.
Eric, did you want to offer a closing?
Sure, absolutely.
So,
Yeah, no, thank you all for these edifying, wish I could rewrite my sermon right now with these good stories. Might even be better than it was. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. God, we give you thanks that you have gifted us with the Holy Spirit to imbue upon us words to speak and prayers to offer and help to lend in time of need, wisdom to interpret and joy to celebrate together. You've given us yourself, the most abundant gift we could ever ask for. We ask only that you would empower us with the same courage that you had in giving yourself, that we might share these gifts we hold in trust with the world, with each other, with the ones we love, with a heart full of generosity and abundance. We thank you for the gifts that make this place and for those who give them. Steward us each in our way so that we may be stewards of the world. In your name we pray. Amen.
This is Sarah. I did put something just in the chat. I'm just a slow typer. It's a reflection from Dr. David Lose that really sits with me a lot. I use this a lot personally, so I don't know if you want to read that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it says, reflection on Matthew 22 by Dr. Lowe says, I wonder if Jesus is doing the same to us, not trying to trap us, of course, but rather inviting us to declare our allegiance. Perhaps the key issue in this exchange isn't whose image is on the coin, in reference to ancient Roman coins with the emperor, but rather whose image is on us. In Genesis 1, God declares God's intent to create humanity in God's own image. So while we feel that how we spend our money is our business and no one else's, yet if we forget in whose image we have been made, we may succumb to the temptation to believe that we are no more than the sum total of our possessions, and that our bank accounts tell a true story about our worth and our value, to tie to Mary's thought as well about our own individual worth and value. Thank you for sharing that, Sarah.
Thank you.
thanks, everyone.
Five pumpkins that were donated by Joanna from choir and creation fair, and we offered them to the Sunday school. These are left over, so if anybody would like a 5 pumpkin,
Thank you all.
Yes.
He's been sticking your teeth in house cavity. He's just been married to a dentist. Oh, shame the other side of it.
And